You've been walking since before sunrise. The marsh is colder than it was last season. The whole world is colder than it used to be, if the old stories are true. Ducks scatter off the reeds ahead of you. You've killed 2 today. Enough for tonight, maybe. Your feet are numb. Your hands are worse. Someone gets the fire going first, always, before anything else, before the ducks are even plucked. You crouch close to it. Close enough that the smell ends your eyes. You don't move away. Not yet. There's a plant growing near this campsite, and someone already knows what it does when it burns. That fire went out around 300 years ago. Nobody put it out on purpose. It simply burned down, got buried under sediment, and waited in what is now one of the driest, emptiest places in North America. Right now, whatever gets you through a rough morning. Coffee, a cigarette, a drink after work. You probably think of as a modern habit. Something civilization invented to cope with civilization. That assumption just lost 9,000 years. Most people, if you ask them, when humans first started deliberately altering their own minds, would guess somewhere around the rise of agriculture, or maybe the first cities, a luxury that showed up once survival got easier. The real answer is the opposite. It shows up while survival was still brutally hard, in a place with no farming, no pottery, no permanent home at all. Here's what scientists thought they knew, right up until 2021. The oldest confirmed evidence of tobacco use anywhere on Earth was a ceramic pipe from Alabama, carrying nicotine residue baked into the clay, dated to about 3,300 years ago. That was the record. Bronze Age Egypt was already building pyramids by then. It felt old. It wasn't close to old enough. In the Great Salt Lake Desert of northern Utah, archaeologist Darren Duke and his team were excavating a hearth eroding straight out of the mudflats. The wind there has spent thousands of years stripping away the ground, one layer at a time, and every so often it strips away exactly the right layer. Inside the ash, they found a spear point, duck bones, and 4 small, charred seeds, barely visible without magnification, from a wild desert plant called Nicotiana attenuata, one of tobacco's untamed ancestors, the kind that still grows in that same stretch of desert today. The site would later get its name from what was sitting right next to those seeds, a duck's wishbone. They called it the wishbone site. The seeds were dated, by association with the rest of the burnt material around them, to 300 years ago. That's not a small correction to the record. That's not even close. It pushes the timeline back over 9,000 years in a single hearth, in a single afternoon of fieldwork. Here's the detail that should stop you for a second. They didn't find leaves, only seeds. And there are at least 2 reasons that matters. First, all 4 seeds turned up inside the same burnt layer as the meal remains, not scattered across the wider campsite, not blown in from somewhere else. Second, they were sitting with a hunting weapon and food waste, meaning this was a moment of deliberate activity, not a patch of wild plants that happened to catch fire on its own. Nobody knows for certain whether these people were smoking the leaves, chewing them, or both. The leaves themselves didn't survive 12,000 years of desert wind, but something was clearly being done with this plant on purpose, close enough to the fire that only the toughest part of it, the seeds, made it through. And if you think the pull toward altering your own mind is a strictly human weakness, you'd be wrong about that too. In parts of Siberia, reindeer seek out a bright red mushroom called Amanita muscaria, growing wild under the birch trees, eat it, and then stagger away from the herd for hours, twitching, clearly somewhere else mentally. Local herders notice something else. The mushroom's active compound passes through a reindeer's body and comes back out in its urine, still potent, with a lot of the toxicity filtered out along the way. So they drink it. Not out of desperation, because it works, and because a fresh mushroom can be scarce while a reindeer is standing right there. 1 dose of mushroom, recycled through an animal's kidneys, can apparently be stretched into several doses of altered urine. This isn't folklore dressed up for shock value. It's documented, repeatable behavior, in the animal and in the humans who learn to use it. So this isn't a story about one clever species inventing a bad habit. It's a story about a switch that was already sitting in the brain, in more than one species, just waiting for the right key. Now go forward almost 10,000 years from that Utah hearth. to a Greek historian named Herodotus, writing around 440 BC. He described a nomadic people, called the Scythians, building small felt tents, heating stones inside them, and throwing hemp seed onto the stones until the tent filled with smoke. He wrote that they came out howling with pleasure. For roughly 2,500 years, most historians treated that line the way you'd treat a fisherman's story, entertaining, probably exaggerated, impossible to check. Then archaeologists actually went looking. Frozen burial mounds in southern Siberia turned up preserved tent frames and bronze braziers with burnt residue still inside them. 2019, a team led by Meng Ren at the Chinese Academy of Sciences ran chemical analysis, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, the kind of testing Herodotus obviously never had access to, on 10 wooden braziers pulled from 8 tombs at a site called Jerzankel, dated to around 500 BC. The residue tested positive for cannabis with unusually high potency. Herodotus hadn't exaggerated anything. If anything, he'd undersold it. 2,500 years later, a chemistry lab basically confirmed a Greek guy's travel diary. Somewhere, a college history professor is finally feeling vindicated. And Jerzankel wasn't alone. In a burial mound in the Caucasus Mountains of southern Russia, archaeologist Andrei Belinsky recovered a set of golden vessels in 2013, kept quiet for years to protect the site from looters. When the residue inside was tested, it came back positive for both opium and cannabis. Different mountains, different tombs, a different mixture entirely. But the same underlying behavior showing up again, on the other side of a continent, without any of these people ever meeting each other. Here's what actually connects a duck hunting camp in Ice Age, Utah, to a funeral tent on the Eurasian steppe, 2 events separated by thousands of miles and 10,000 years. Neither one needed permission from agriculture, or writing, or cities, or any of the things we usually credit with making humans advanced. Whatever this drive is, it was already running underneath all of that. A UCLA psychopharmacologist named Ronald Siegel spent 2 decades studying exactly this pattern, across humans and animals both, and he gave it a name, the 4th drive, SHI. After hunger, thirst, and sex, he argued, comes the drive to feel different from normal, to step outside your own baseline state. On purpose, whatever the method happens to be. Not a flaw bolted onto human nature by modern stress. Baseline behavior. As old as the other 3. 12,300 years ago, someone in a Utah marsh burned a plant that altered how they felt, and 4 seeds survived to prove it. Reindeer in Siberia do the same thing with a mushroom, no human involved at all. 2,500 years ago, a historian nobody quite believed turned out to be exactly right, and the chemistry backed him up. And every single time, the behavior showed up long before anyone had a word for it, let alone a reason to be ashamed of it. So, the next time you reach for coffee before you can function, or pour a drink at the end of a long week, you're not doing something modern life invented to cope with itself. You're doing something a hunter in a freezing marsh was already doing 12,000 years before the first word was ever written down. He just didn't have a name for what he was reaching for either. He only knew it worked.